came out of our last discussion. Staff was directed to come up with some options or some avenues to maybe address the average lakeshore setback, to try and either streamline it or make it easier to use, and kind of brainstorm some options for council to consider. So one way we saw that was to recalculate the average lakeshore setback with abutting neighbors. So instead of finding on either side their closest point and drawing a line that bisects, calculating an actual average by getting their closest point on either side, adding them together and dividing by 2. So it's a measured distance from the edge of the water instead of a bisecting line. This can create a measured distance setback from the water as a benefit. Also follows the shoreline and can allow for more uniform building envelope, and it resolves the issues with peninsulas and bays and things. Because instead of a bisecting line that does not maybe take into account a curving lakeshore, this is a measured setback we measure from the OHW. So it's a relationship to the edge of the water, which we think would help solve some of the variances that you guys are seeing. Some of the cons or challenges with this avenue would be the setback is still determined based on your neighbor's location. Discrepancies in setbacks will continue to be a challenge, so it wouldn't resolve all variance applications. And it could allow homes to be built forward of a neighbor's home, because if my one neighbor is 100 feet back, my other neighbor is 80 feet back, if I'm building brand new, I might then would be allowed to be 90 feet, right? If I add those two and divide by 2, I'd be 90 feet. So I'd be allowed to be 10 feet closer to the water than my 100-foot neighbor next to me. So it's not necessarily creating those funny angles that create kind of funky shaped building envelopes, but it's a more uniform square, but it would allow for some construction closer to the lake than maybe one of my neighbors. So something else staff was kind of talking about was this could be an alternative way to measure in lieu of the current policy, or even concurrent with the current policy if we say we pick the less restrictive of the two or the more restricted of the two or something to try and alleviate. So it's a discussion staff has been playing, has continued to have with actual measuring on a hard calculation versus creating a line. Option 2 here was maybe create an exception for homes over, let's say, 300 feet. This is taken as an example of one of our neighboring cities that has this exception. Pros is it keeps the existing definition as is and then familiar. It eliminates some extreme setbacks from the equation. And there's minimal impact as the scenario as the layout is not common around the lake. So it wouldn't necessarily alleviate a lot of the variances that you see, but it would alleviate some of those super extreme situations. Con is it allows building in front of your neighboring homes again. The setback is still based on neighboring homes. It does not fix challenges with the curvy lake shore. And it still would create another exception to that already large city code description that we have. So another kind of, we have a B and a C as an exception, this would, or an A and a B, this would be C. So kind of more language to work through and interpret. And then what staff had question was, is 300 reasonable, right? What's the magic number there at that distance for an exception?
It seems like on that number 2, that would more, I could see that more as a hardship issue, that you wouldn't need to put in a number to solve that, because that would just become a hardship. Now granted, the hardship would create a variance to say I need a variance, but I think that gets solved probably with a hardship more than it would probably.
Yeah. I think seeing someone like in this image attached here where they're 500 feet back, you can clearly see that's, unique and not the intent of the code of making a uniform one.
Right, and that's what I think on this one in particular, finding that, to your point, finding the number, I think is, what's the real number to say this is the right number, versus something like this more coming to the council as a hardship to say if it's reasonable or not, so we can at least apply our reasonable standard as a council, if it makes sense. That would be my feedback on that one.
Yeah.
I encourage anybody to ask questions while we're going through this.
Yes, please.
Sometimes you lose your thought, get to option 3 and you forget what you're thinking about in option 1.
Yeah.
So when we're comparing to neighboring cities and so forth, what are typically the neighboring cities on the water doing as far as lakeshore setbacks?
Yeah, I would say I pulled a handful of them, from our last discussion. Let me see here, I have a table. I think I got responses from about 7 or 8 of the cities.
Okay.
And 4 of them had no average lakeshore setback. So they only go with their 75-foot lake setback, or they only have one, which is the one that's required by the DNR. Some cities it might be 50 feet, some have a higher standard of 100 feet, but they don't have this averaging setback. And then I had 3 responses that said, yes, they do have an average lakeshore setback. Minnetonka Beach just enacted it, so it's new and they didn't have any examples of variances or challenges as they just adopted it, I think earlier this year.
And they're all built out to begin with, so
Yeah.
what's it like?
So what do they do? Are they 75?
They modeled theirs, after ours, and then they gave us secondary, exception for decks. So they have 2 average lakeshore setbacks, one for building, one for decks.
And we don't have any other visuals of a lake are protected, but nothing of like a prairie, if I like that, there'd be no, I want my, is there setbacks or a sunset, I like my sunset, we don't protect that, just
No.
because you choose that
And,
as
and
your,
if you're across the street from the lake, you don't get any rights to protect your lake view.
got it, okay,
Yep, it's just for properties that have lakeshore
got it.
that this pertains to.
And I think more relevant would be the question of what do other cities have, or what do other cities have that have is an abundance of lakeshore like we do. Cause you might get, Mound has a little bit, Minnetonka Beach, the majority of their city is, but in context, it's not all that much compared to us, kind of thing, so.
Wayzata and Minnetrista do a combination of kind of what we have, and then our met option 1 of doing a hard calculation. They just have different avenues of implementing. Wayzata picks the more restrictive of those 2 setbacks to kick that building way back. Minnetrista picks the less restrictive of those 2 setbacks.
And you can
So-
have philosophical differences on each side of that, cause
Yeah.
once you start getting closer, you can't push them back, it just keeps getting closer, so that's always the issue to think about.
Mhm.
So the way I look at this is, the authority that has jurisdiction on the setback is really the DNR, and they've implemented a 50-foot. 50.
50?
The
50.
DNR, yeah, we have a 75.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
okay.
so other, I just did a project in, Greenwood, that's 50 feet. And Melanie and I talked about this a little bit today too, and it's like, a lot of those lots, they just don't have the depth. If they put 75 feet on a lot of those in Greenwood in particular, there'd be no lot left to build on, so. But the DNR, the authority that has jurisdiction, is 50. The city of Orono has done 75. And so one of the things that I would like to have come out of this conversation is this notion that the neighbors have a right to a view over the other neighbor's property, because I don't believe they do. I mean, they have their lot, and their neighbors should be entitled to do whatever improvements to their property that meets code. And so, I don't know if it specifically says in our code that the reason for doing this is to protect the views of the neighbor, but it's a conversation that keeps being introduced. I've heard it I read the planning commission on even for our meeting today, and, so it's, that conversation, if that is our goal, then let's really, make it clear that that's our goal. But if it's not our goal, then I think we should do our part in making sure people understand that the intent is not to protect the neighbor's view, over somebody else's piece of property.
And that's a good conversation to have, because that kind of bleeds into option 1, which you get away from, the average retro setback line. You're taking the average regardless of what it happens to be, and you can build regardless of whether it's in front of somebody else's house or not. And then you get the thing as well, do you take the less restrictive or more restrictive if you want to do both? But I agree with you, that's in the end, that's really the conversation that's going on. It has
Right.
nothing to do about anything but the view over somebody else's property is essentially what's going on.
Well, you ask yourself, what is your lake view? And typically, it's either out of the front or out of the back. It's not necessarily out of your sides to see through, like you said, your neighbor's property.
Yeah, and no, I mean, I support this idea of not crowding the lake, and it seems reasonable that the further back you are from the lake, you know, the better chance you have to make sure it's more pure runoff getting to the lake, and there's lots of things that can be done on the lake shore to enhance lake quality and everything. But the more yard you put out there, the more fertilizer you put out there too, so you set these houses back, and are we working against ourselves in some respects of that too? So, to me, that's the other, maybe the other piece of this that I think we should, you know, make it clear what our intent is, and we can include that in the code. So we can start eliminating that conversation that comes up all the time. Neighbors, how many times have we been there, neighbors come, oh, I've had that view, there was that place by your, house, Denny, a few years ago, and somebody lived behind them and didn't want them to build to the code height because they enjoyed the view over the top for all of us. Well, that isn't what these codes are meant to do, to protect the views of the neighbors.
And because if your decision is that we are gonna preserve over the neighbors, then option one just kinda goes away. Cause that would impinge on all of that. If the issue is you get your view out the back, straight out your property, and that's what you get, you don't get it going that way, out the sides, then option one is something that's in play.
I like option one, it sounds very reasonable to me, and it's a reasonable compromise, especially, like you said, when we've got some of these peninsulas and so forth. I think that solves a lot of the problems.
Well, you get
And
like,
it looks funny if one house has to get like set so far back that it looks ridiculous and it really kills
well,
it.
that's the issue with the neighbors, where you get the arguments of they just wanna prohibit their neighbor from doing anything because, oh, it blocks this view out the side of my window, out the side of my house, and they can't do that, and then all of a sudden we're in that position, so yeah, I think that's the big question to decide, really.
Well, I agree with what you said, and think that to have, especially for those of us who are newer to council, to have a discussion about this from a higher level is helpful, because this, at least from my looking back into this issue goes back, when was this created? Was it early nineties?
So we put the average lakeshore setback when we adopted the shoreline ordinance in the nineties.
Okay, so part of my question, it just from a larger, just to draw the lens way back, is why was it created? How does that line up with the mission and vision statement of our city? And what, if anything, is impacting this? How are we being impacted negatively as a city by the current standard? And, you know, as you've already done in some of these pros and cons, what unforeseen consequences might result from a change in this? The other thing I wanted to ask about was this, was an amendment to the code back in 2019. And maybe it was just a language amendment, ordinance 234.
I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but I
Okay.
believe it was when we changed it, so it doesn't need to bisect, if it bisected somebody's
Yeah.
house.
Yeah, we
it
changed
moves
that,
the
that the
point.
view couldn't go through somebody's house.
Yeah,
Yeah, we changed that because of, your neighbor,
Yeah.
the Dunkleys.
yeah, cause they were on kind of
Prevent
a
them.
point, and so the average lakeshore setback was bisecting the house where the point was being created from.
Right.
And so, was that really serving the purpose when the line was bisecting a building,
Right.
when there was, the whole point of the line is to protect building
Protect-
views, and there's
protect the
already
view,
building lakeward of it,
Yeah,
so.
and so it seems anyway from my first glance at this, that this has been something that's been revisited again and again and
Mhm.
again
Yeah,
since the early 90s, or more specifically in the past 2 years.
every handful of years, I have amendments, I think there was 2 in the nineties, I have one from '04, that gave some administrative approvals for encroachments, and then later in 2000s, there was another change that kinda took that away. And so it's a handful of years, every few years, it gets revisited and retweaked and rewritten, or an exception gets created, or because of a situation that came up or something.
But
So
until you answer Matt's question,
Mhm.
all you can do is tweak it. If you answer Matt's question to the affirmative that we're not gonna protect your view off the side, you just get your straight up, then now you can have a wholesale change. Now you can talk about a wholesale change, but you have to answer that question to the.
Yeah, and I think that is why it's just been slowly progressing, because I think there's some fear that, wow, this is such a big change, and how might that affect everybody at once? People that just build, and and adhere to this. But the, you know, other piece of this too is, you know, one of the responsibilities we have is to find ways to better our language to support our residents so they don't have to come for variances for reasonable things. And so improving this is a way to do that, because you provided us the numbers. I mean, this is a variance that's coming up and being granted on a regular basis. We have to keep in mind there's no prevention of putting trees in somebody's view. So if somebody
Trees,
wanted
bushes,
to
right.
eliminate the neighbor's view, they have every right to do that with, you know, by planting trees, and over the course of time would, you know, fully eliminate somebody's view over their lot. So it's not like allowing people the flexibility to utilize the land that they own. You know, there's other ways for them to start blocking out views, so.
Laura, how many public hearings have been held on this since the council's been looking at some of these changes?
Public hearings for average leach or setback?
Yes,
Well, for variances, anytime there's a variance, it requires a public hearing.
I mean, it's a global issue.
Every time we change the code, a public hearing is required. For every time we change the code for within the zoning chapter, so that would include the average leach or setback change would require a public hearing.
And the last time we had a really big code change on our land development was when we changed the, square footage of how much hardcover we could build on. Well, two of them. One, we changed structural coverage and hard coverage, but we also then included back about, I don't know, 10 to 12 years ago, we never included the square footage that you had in the 0 to 75. Then all of a sudden we lopped that in. So like my house, for example, went from 29% when I bought it at 29%, and it went all the way down to 19, just by adding that in. And so that made a huge difference. So all of a sudden that made you have bigger houses immediately, you know, so that was a big change. And it was, I don't know if it was a plus or a negative, but that was the change. It dramatically reduced everybody's hardcover. And gave them more opportunity for decks and whatever it happens to be that maybe they didn't plan, they didn't maximize their house before it. So I don't have as much, I guess, feeling bad for people when they come in after they've got all that extra square footage and maximize their house and say, oh, but I didn't put a deck in, or I didn't put a patio in, and say, oh my God, if you go back 9-10 years ago, you wouldn't have even got that, you know, so it's all perspective at some point, so, but I think that is the main question. Until we answer that question, we can't really make a decision either.
And I think that's kind of what Laura and staff are trying to get at, is if we're gonna make changes to this average lake shore setback or abolish it or whatever, we need to affirm with the council what is your intent, because historically, the reason you put an average lake shore setback into place is for view shed. And
To create that uniform.
either view shed or neighborhood continuity.
Right.
The 75-foot setback, the one, you know, that derives from the DNR code, I mean, that's there for water quality and air quality and all that kind of stuff.
50.
The 50 from the DNR, 75 from Orono.
We've got a-
Yeah.
And then our further water quality stuff, particularly in our lakeshore areas, and our hardcover limits.
Yeah, right.
Is another effort to address water quality, but average lakeshore setback is, I don't think anyone would say it's there for
views
anything,
and
yeah,
just
anything
that
to do with water
neighborhood
quality.
uniform.
Right.
How does it affect, like, from the lakeside looking in? Like, I think again about the vision statement of Orono, preservation of natural rural beauty, and, all these things that sort of, and we've talked about this also with retaining walls. How is that viewed from the lake looking in? How does the average lakeshore affect, our city as a whole from the lakeside looking in, if not from the other? How is this affecting, you know, the quality?
So this isn't changing anything within the 75. So the 75 is still, nothing's allowed to be built there, or extremely regulated in that aspect. So that natural kind of shoreline aspect shouldn't be impacted a lot with this average lakeshore setback, depending on how you change it, because it really is a building massing setback, and how it is intended to work is by pulling those buildings away. Where I think it might impact is when you're stuck in a development where all those houses are already within the 75, so Crystal Bay Road, that type of situation. those types of neighborhoods, we lean heavy on the average lakeshore setback to create that neighborhood uniformity to stop in allowing people to inch closer and closer, but really, every single one of those houses are in the 75 foot anyway, so they would have to come through the variance process to be rebuilt or an addition, where all that critique is happening. Whether they need, they need 6 variances to build, is the 7th variance for an average lakeshore setback really looking at, are we really using that variance tool to the best of our ability?
So the biggest potential change as I see it, like, on the northeast side of Forest Bay, we had that family that had come to us for a variance, and they were like 300 feet back from the lake because of the average lakeshore setback.
Mhm.
Right, where you got a bunch of houses, already pushed back, if you're in that position and then go right to 75 feet with the 300, that's
Yeah,
more of the
visually.
concern that I, would want to understand the effects of before bringing any changes, those really, people that are way back and all of a sudden, okay, you can go to 75 feet, I think that would be
Yeah, so some of our larger districts in the LR1A districts are like 2-acre zones, right? So they're large 1-2 acre lots kind of stuff. The average lakeshore setback is pulling those houses pretty far back, hundreds of feet back. A lot of those houses, if they're have a street in front of them, I'm thinking all those houses along Shoreline Drive, where they have just those little dock spots on the lake, but they're big lots on the lakeside, they would have a street yard setback from the street pushing them back, as well as the 75.
yeah.
Otherwise, the other developments over, say, like, down on the very far end of Fox, right? Those large, like,
Yeah.
8-acre lots, way down there, it would be the 75. There's no other setback besides the average lakeshore setback, but a lot of those houses, the drive or the desire for those developments is that they have those big yards and that big, large setback in space and those are those big 2-acre lots. We have the hardcover and the structural coverage limiting the buildability or the amount of massing on those lots, but yeah, that would have an impact.
But it seems to me too, instead of that straight line, what were you about to say something?
No.
That straight line, instead of doing the straight line thing, the measuring, well, just like we do when they calculate the 75-foot setback, right? They follow the contours of the shoreline, and so if we did start establishing that as a calculation, as a measurement, maybe that is a good, next step to go through.
And, as we're proposing it in option 1, we're using the neighbors' locations to create that calculation, so that would build on that neighborhood kind of uniformity, right, to kind of keep everyone around the same setback, but it's not, it would follow more, the setback follows the lakeshore, so I think that's kind of on the right track of what we're hoping to achieve with that option 1.
And then, so I use that, I think it was Forest Bay on the northeast side. It's like, maybe part of this is we look at how do we evaluate the under 42 inches in height stuff, that becomes, is that a 75-foot setback now?
No, nothing's allowed in the 75.
No, I mean, but
Yes,
If you're-
under 42 inches can be within the average lakeshore setback. Like
Within
a
the
pool
average
or
lakeshore.
patio.
Yeah, but it
Like
can't be
today.
in the 75.
so
Yeah.
then, but the minute it's a deck coming out of a walkout,
The minute it's over
Then they-
42 inches in height.
in height, because, and our idea behind that is because the view,
Yeah.
neighbor's view. So if we come to an agreement that we're not protecting the neighbor's view, we can at least eliminate that deck piece that keeps coming up where people need a variance to put a deck in that's outside of 75.
I think that's for option 3, is allow decks to encroach
Mhm.
as a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, so, option 3, kind of hitting on that, is consider, right now we use decks, or anything over 42 inches is where we start our point to create the line, the bisecting line, so a deck would be a point for creating that bisecting line today. If you want to allow decks to encroach, that could eliminate a handful of variances. It keeps the intent of that building and massing away from the lake, but it lets those sometimes outdoor extracurricular activities to be used closer to the lake, like deck, outdoor living kind of spaces. Some people wanna do like retaining walls and outdoor kitchens, and sometimes that can kind of butt up against that 42-inch height limit. So I guess all in that same thread, right, of allowing more accessory type outdoor uses to encroach in the average lakeshore setback. Like we kind of hit on, it's still based on neighboring homes. It does not fix the challenge of a curvy or lakeshore peninsula. It's another exception we could list, or we could rewrite the code to eliminate the 42 inches if that's something that you think would kind of address this issue. Decks could still potentially impact lake views, right? If a deck comes off a second story of a house, and people don't always build 10 by 10 decks. I think, they build 20 by 20 decks now, and because they want the outdoor furniture and the dining table and their grill and everything. So those large improvements still could impact neighboring views, so
It's
that's-
neighboring views over property that's not theirs, though. We're still getting
Yeah.
back to that same
Yeah,
question.
And then we have finishing off, like screening in and using that underneath side of the deck as enclosed space. That often happens as well, and it becomes more of a part of the living
Living
space, part of the house.
So Laura, I had a question, so staff is recommending, you listed option A and option B here, you're recommending a text amendment to eliminate? That's
So-
what staff is recommending?
Yeah, I gave two options, so, kind of just breezing through the rest of this, I have an option 4 here, which was to eliminate the average lakeshore setback and just use the 75-foot setback. We still have those protections in place for lake quality. It would simplify the development of properties, it would be consistent with other neighboring cities, as over half that I heard back from don't implement an average lakeshore setback. It would eliminate a lot of variances. And it would remove those neighborhoods, that perceived right over a neighbor's property. Cons is, it could allow development closer to the lake. It also could impact existing views or rights that people believe that they have, right? So that can be a hard pill to swallow for some people, depending on where they are in their development stage and what's going on with their property. Option 5, I have no change to the code at all. Residents and stakeholders are familiar with these codes, continues to be systematically pushes development further away from the lake, and its additional setback that has an outcome of preserving lake quality. Cons is it requires a lot of variances, a lot of staff time, a lot of development time for residents. It can be a subjective variance, and it relies a lot on, are the neighbors okay with this, kind of question being asked. And it preserves the rights of neighboring view sheds, like we've talked about. So out of those 5 options, staff does recommend considering 2. One is eliminating the average lakeshore setback. The average lakeshore setback intent is to protect that view shed, which is subjective and not the goal of the city council from our discussions, from what I'm hearing. Otherwise, that option 1, which is recalculate the average lakeshore setback, so it's a more measured average based on the lakeshore distance and not a bisecting line cutting off the buildability of the
Which you're
property.
talking option A.
Option
First
one.
one. Or option 1, I mean.
Yep, that's the other one staff would like to further develop, I guess.
Are we all in agreement that the protection is not necessarily to look for neighbor side views? Because I would agree with that. I think your lakeshore view is through the rear of the house, it's not necessarily off the side, and we've had past discussions on this, especially when we're looking at the Duncan property and Eric's property and so forth. And the one neighbor was concerned about their side views, and to
That's
me,
all they were concerned about.
yeah, your lakeshore view is not necessarily looking out of the side of the house, it's looking out of your rear windows. And I think, I don't know if you said it, Matt or Denny, but the point of, there's nothing that prohibits somebody from putting up trees on the side of their property, which is going to block that view anyway.
I think it's
So-
also hard to say that we protect this view, because a handful of people doesn't mean that someone else doesn't like other set view of prairie or
Yeah.
sunset or fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But,
Maybe they
but
like
the
that
person
way.
would have the right to
Yeah.
put up plantings or trees or whatever up and down the sides of their property, which would block those side views anyway.
I mean, I do like the option one with, and having, you could, and you keep the ALS, but you'd also have option one, you just go to the least restrictive. I'd rather have more tools at our disposal than less tools. And I like the possibility also of saying that the decks, and we'd have to work on that, or what size, you know, that the decks wouldn't, allow decks to encroach. Because decks typically aren't gonna have the roof line, they're just gonna be coming out, they're not gonna be up 30
Yeah,
feet
and
high.
then, you know, what happens when it's a covered porch versus,
You know, when you get down
open
low,
deck.
right, when you get down low, so we have.
well, no, I
Or
mean,
even above it.
even
We
if
have
they
like
do
stacking
a,
decks as well.
or a screen porch, or, you know, with
Yeah,
a
people
roof.
put roofs over their decks all the time. Like,
Yeah.
is that something that
The staff.
you'd want this to restrict? If we were allowing decks to encroach, would you allow it to be a roofed deck?
Why would we let decks encroach?
Well, it's not, we say encroaching, but
Yeah,
the government,
It's the
the
side
DNR
view.
says 50 feet.
right.
We're saying 75 feet plus, or maybe plus,
No,
the
right,
average lake
right,
shore
if we
setback.
said, let's say we
Removing
didn't say
decks
just
from
75.
the ALS.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and just said you do
I
the
don't think
75
I don't
across
think
the
I'd
board.
wanna have roofs over the deck, cause then it's just structure at that point, you know?
well, then it
Yeah.
starts as a 3-season, then it's a 4-season.
Then it's a 4-season, right?
So I mean, maybe that is a way to get this started and
And knowing,
Say they're
to your
open.
point, the decks that can be stacked,
Mm-hmm.
then it could be an open deck, but it's still a stacked type
The
of
top
structure.
one's open,
It's
right,
a-
the top one's open,
Right.
and the other,
Cause
cause the
if it's
base
stacked,
fencing.
it's not a roof over the
Right,
level below.
right.
Oh, and what about patios that extend over 42 inches in height, that maximum, with walls or a seating wall or a grill or something, which wouldn't be allowed now? But are we willing to do a deck to encroach, but not a patio that has these taller walls maybe, or is it
I think
all of these accessory type structures are we okay with?
I think if the purpose is to simplify, so a homeowner could, I think removing all
Yeah,
encroachment, all,
So it's
Just
just
find
the
something where
house, so it's just the
we
house.
find
I
us
think
solid
mine just
something
sounds
that
very
anyone could
reasonable.
understand,
Just
so even to the
eliminating
city's
the
website,
42
Right.
inch encroachment.
instead of needing a
You know,
translator.
option one is good.
Oh, just option one.
Option one.
Oh, I liked, wait, option one or option A?
you wanna
Oh,
put it
I'm
in?
sorry.
I know.
Option one is recalculating, but
Right, you like that one, the recalculating?
Yeah, I
But
do.
leave
Can you
the
put that
decks and
up?
stuff
Can you
alone
put that up?
Yeah.
and keep it as is.
Yeah.
See, I like to eliminate, just going to average lake shore setback would be my inclination.
Just
Sounds
the
like-
75.
Oh, just going to
Just
the 75 foot lake
75.
setback, eliminate the average lake shore
Mhm.
setback.
And then there is no gray area, it is one, would make sense if the idea was to simplify.
I'm gonna have to, think about it, and actually I have to head out tonight, I've got a school function to go to, so I have to leave early tonight, I apologize. But
I think
just
this
gotta
wants more
listen.
discussion.
Yeah,
It
Oh,
does,
absolutely,
need more
yeah.
discussion. I don't have an idea, I'm kind of taking this in tonight, and, we'll need more time to think and process, it's a lot of variables, so.
I think just having this conversation about what we're willing to look at and why, I think just can help us think a little bit more about that.
Right.
Come back and revisit this and say, after sitting for a week or 2 or 3 now, what are our more thoughts on A, B, C, and D to be able to help you guys then move forward with something?
What if we bring back in a few weeks or maybe early next year at a work, and again in a work session, and just
I
an
can
abbreviated,
simplify this.
simplified version of this.
This is good stuff, though.
Yeah.
And just so you all know, this is the very beginning of a much bigger process, right?
Yeah.
Because, one, you can't make a decision in a work session,
Right.
and this, impacts our planning code, so, you know,
Yeah.
this has gotta go through a very formal
Very
process
formal
once we
process.
start it on that path, so.
Once we get clear direction from you
Mhm.
of where you're leaning, we would then draft actual ordinance language and go back to planning commission and have public hearings, and planning commission could tweak and look at the specific language, but.
We've still gotta come back here.
Maybe it could be something like option one, but not having decks or accessory structures.
Yeah, and then-
Nothing within the 75, but,
Right.
Yeah, nothing-
but if it was a deck or something of that nature, maybe there's some flexibility there.
Well, you guys start thinking about then, how big a deck? you know, is it a 50 by 60 size deck that somebody wants to put on, literally all the way to the 75-foot line?
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, somebody would do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you
So-
know, that's where we rely on structural and hardcover, right, to, you know, mitigate that. Same thing, like these really deep lots that we have, cause I'm a fan of just getting rid of this ALS altogether. But I do need to, you know, where staff could help me maybe is see, you know, give some examples of those really deep lots
Yeah.
and play through some scenarios about what that would mean.
Yeah,
But
what-
one of the checks and balances we have is structural and hardcover. So people on these long, deep lots, they put the house that close, that house is getting smaller and smaller by every foot because of
Driveway.
the driveway that
It
they
would
need to
take
get there.
to travel there. Would
Right.
Eat up all
Only the
the
hardcover portion.
The hardcover.
Only the hardcover portion.
But
That's an
hardcover
interesting thought.
plus,
Yeah.
Plus
and
structure,
that
they-
limits the house size
Yeah.
to get
It
all the way
does.
down there, they need
Yeah.
to use a large portion of their hardcover to
Make it
service
To get there.
the house. So it's
Right.
to the, if they want to get close to the lake, that would shrink their building envelope.
On big lots, yeah.
On very big lots.
On
long,
long
skinny-
skinny lots.
yeah.
Let me ask you something, would it be impossible to take some interesting scenarios around the city and say, if we implemented this plan, this is kinda how it would look, or if you implemented option 2, this is how it would look? Just kind of
Yeah.
like as a what if in some of the, more challenging areas,
Yeah,
I
you know
think
what I mean?
yeah.
the purpose of this was just to see what is our temperature on being able to change it, which
Right.
sounds like everybody is
Yeah,
open to that, so
absolutely.
I think even pulling up the last 15 that were done this year, instead of trying to find the, hey, these were real scenarios, let's use those 15.
Sure.
This is
Fine.
how, and then that would be a really nice,
because we
Or
have a
or
big
the
chunk.
obvious ones that changed their mind and just went with what coal was.
and
Yeah.
then for me, it'd be nice to know the impact on, if there was, any sort of impact on the water, by this, I think that would be important to know as well.
I think
Everything's
all you're
staying
gonna
back
have is-
75.
We're just gonna have hardcover closer, you're still gonna have the same amount of
Yeah.
hardcover. It just might be in the front of the house versus the back of the house, so.
Yeah, I'm
Depends how you
hearing,
look at it,
I'm
right?
hearing you'd like to see
You know,
scenarios of if we allow decks or, those accessory type uses to encroach in the average acre setback, how would that play? I'm also hearing how would these lots look if we were just to eliminate the average acre setback? What does that building envelope kind of look like in these either large lots, skinny lots, neighborhood type things? So I think I have some marching orders with that and I can.
Well, good
I
for
can
you,
bring
you
some
got some on this
information.
kind of.
And-
I know a lot
And
of
like
it.
Marie
This is
said,
very
done.
helpful.
maybe know some of the ones that we
Some
took care
past
of,
variances?
yeah, some past ones.
Yep.
Well, in Casco, I remember, it wasn't that long ago, somebody had a big pizza oven, big
Yeah.
brick pizza oven, that was like way forward of the house, and the neighbor was bitching about, well, that's our average lake shore setback, whatever, and so there's, but then you would get people that might start building those, you know?
The
Right.
pizza, I don't
Yeah,
know.
they wanted one this whole time.
Right, they just didn't realize.
They
it.
want the pizza.
But all the people that are ahead, 75 or ahead, you know, all the properties we have,
That's a variance anyway.
doesn't affect
doesn't
them
affect
at
them
all,
at
so
all.
we don't have to concern ourselves with
Doesn't,
that.
oh, Crystal Bay Road doesn't affect.
You're right, a good chunk of what we
Right.
have already that isn't affected, they're already taking advantage of the historical location of those houses.
The small
right?
lots close to the lake, yeah.
So to me, it just becomes, what are in these really, where we're
Large.
deep now?
Mhm.
You know, what would that mean? And some of those deep ones are that way because it gets low
Yeah,
at the lake, you know, they
Yeah,
can't
some of those
reasonably
on
build,
bluff,
so.
yeah, like
Bluffs.
have bluffs and
Yeah.
stuff all over
Right.
there.
Oh, the
And
bluffs
that's
and-
prohibited.
That's another meeting.
And it would eliminate some of the arguments between neighbors like the Dumplings, because that was a really nasty one. It was all about the average lake shore setback, and it was going through the house, and it was just how much harm could I do to my neighbor for the
Right.
most part. And
It's just been busy.
Yeah, it is subjective at times, it's hard.
Okay,
We have time for,
yeah, let's run into the new agenda
Yeah,
management
hey, can I
software.
just throw in, and then staff should be just thinking about any other codes that we have that are based on protecting the neighbor's sight line. You know, we should not throw in. Okay,
I don't think we have a
I don't
lot.
think we.
just that deck thing is one of
Those
those.
plants, we don't manage plants or plantings or anything, so.
No, but every time we go through a variance for average lake shore setback, we do note if it impacts the neighbor's view or not, so. It's
Yeah,
something
we
to
try.
think about, you know, if we're gonna continue to have some of these variances, is that not a factor anymore? Or like, what is the hardship then to approve it?
Question.
Okay, software.
Thank you, that was helpful.
So I've asked Nola to give a quick download, so as you know, we've been in the process of transitioning some electronics in here. The other thing that was kind of part of that package that we're just getting ready to implement is our meeting management software. So basically how, a lot of it is particular to how staff prepares the council packets, but there is a little bit kind of at the end of how, particularly for council members, you will interface with future packets. So Nola's gonna give you a real quick.
Yeah, so basically, right now, every department makes their agenda statements and gives us multiple documents, Word, Excel, PDF. We go through, read it, correct it, approve it, transfer it to a PDF, combine all the PDFs. We put them in Dropbox for you, we put them on the website. It's very time consuming. The new software will put more on the departments. So what they put in is what will automatically be added to a template that then, there's an approval process that will go to the department heads to add them, and then the city clerk. And it will be more seamless, less on the city clerk to do the labor intensive, combine all the packets.
So you're doing that good time, right? Yeah.
Yes, just in time. So, like, currently, if you go to the website, this is our Granicus site, and you click on, and I need something to put this mouse on so it works better. You go to agenda, and you bring it up, and this is what you see. We manually put in all these links for all the documents, the way it
What do
is.
you do?
Yeah. So the new agenda management system ends up, what they create comes into something like this, and I'm gonna need to refresh this. And what you will end up doing is you can bookmark this page. If you have an iPad and you wanna bring it, that's great, you can look at this. It basically looks the same, and this is called iLegislate, and this comes to you only. You can still see the agenda and the fact that there's an attachment. You can make notes for yourself if you had a question to bring up.
This
Is
is so
it public data?
This is not, this is just your side to look at. The public will still see what they're seeing. This is you.
Your notes are.
Your notes are not public. This is like writing on a piece of paper and bringing the piece of paper.
Yeah, no, but if we use this, is this part of a data request?
No.
Our notes and stuff?
Not this way, because even if you were to write a note on a Post-it note, that is still considered public data.
Yeah.
If you have a piece of paper with city information on it, that is considered public data. So if we were to request that and you had a notebook full of notes, you would have to provide that. So it falls into this same thing. And it can just be, remember to ask.
To answer your question, if you write something on here as a council member, and in the future we get a data request for that, would we have to turn that over?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But depending on how you wanna do this, this could be a reminder to ask about setback, or
Yeah, right.
something of that nature.
Or a note.
Yeah, just a note.
It's
So-
not necessarily your opinion. But
No, it can just be a reminder, and then if you open up the attachment, it will open up.
It might be opening up on the other screen.
Another screen?
We have two.
Right
screens.
here, we're operating on that
Oh,
computer right now.
Here, let me go, let me come over here. So if you open up an attachment, and if you notes, you have the option to highlight something that you have a question on, that you could come back and, look at later as a reminder. You can also give yourself a Post-it note, you know,
Sure.
needs correction. correction, and you save that note, it tells you that there's a note on that council item. You can bring up your notes, you can bring up your bookmarks. It's basically the same as Dropbox as far as you can look at each item individually.
And is this a webpage?
This is web-based,
Okay.
just like Granicus is now.
So it's got a bookmark, yeah, so then I can just pull up
Yep,
the
you can just go
page.
to this, it's Granicus/I legislate, and we will give you that bookmark when we go live.
Send you the link, and then you can.
Yeah,
That should be easy enough, because they can have it on their phone.
exactly, you can have it on your phone, you can have it on an iPad, you can have it on a laptop, whatever you bring that way. If there were a video included, you can have it on there also. And it goes back to past meetings, and this also brings in our historical. So you can go back to the council meeting in September, you can go back to the council meeting in July if you were looking for references, because something has been brought up again, that it was tabled and brought up, you could bring up that council item to remind yourself, especially if you've written a note. You
So
can
would
write
that
notes on
video
it.
link go to the council video
So,
of that item?
What's your question?
no.
The
it was
video.
not. You
The
would
The
have to
video
go-
tab,
Oh, got it.
could,
Yeah.
cause we put those links in the video, you know, when you wanna watch a
It
video,
goes
you
right through it, right?
Yeah, so the Swayga part of it, in case you guys hadn't seen it yet, they're also in the middle of a merge between our old, the way it was, and then our new video. So up at the top is the Swayga video. And in case you hadn't seen any of it, the video comes up. You can see that there is, a transcript, which will give you the best that they do for word. If you find where you wanna be and you click on something, it will skip to that part on the video. They have, updated it, it used to be by, title. We have now updated and had them change it to, each item menu, so that it's not by the community development section, it's by the items under the community development section. So we've tweaked it even as we have been, updating the system. So as we go live, and we're hoping to go live in the next council meeting, we did a, run through this week. Each department did an item, put it through this so that we could go through the approval processes, see how to make attachments. There might be some different, views to the action items that you see as far as the title page, but it will be minimal and you might not even notice it. I know that Laura is looking at they have the most intensive items in the packet and how it will look. They might have more things as attachments that were on the main memo page, cause it's all text. We don't have the ability to put pictures in there like they have now. Occasionally they'll give you a small, snapshot of a property on that agenda item. That will probably be an, attachment now. But other than that, it should be seamless as far as, how you see each agenda item and their attachments.
If there was a question on something in there, could you bring attention to it, or is it still go to Adam, go to Laura, like, go to the department, or can you just put
Like
like
if
the
you have
at,
a question,
Yeah,
as a
but like-
council member,
at Laura, you got more feedback on this, or?
I don't think you can communicate, like send
I
a
can't
message
send
to
it to
me
you.
in the system.
Okay, so
When it's under review, it has to go to Adam and Nola, and they can give me comments as an item that we're working through, but once it's published and you see it and the public sees it,
got it,
you can't like send me a message, it has to be, you have to call me.
okay, got it. I'd like to.
So we do look forward to having this active, like I said, at the next meeting. We're waiting for a couple more updates. But it will either be side by side, or you will see the new management. And the email, instead of the email saying it's available in Dropbox,
Yeah.
here's your link, it will be go to, Granicus
The webpage.
I legislate, and it will come up there, and you'll be able to see it through.
And there'll be a
this.
little link on that email, we just
Yep.
click on.
Yeah,
Okay, good job. I mean, this is a nice, improvement, cause the other thing is, when we get those packets, you know, there'll be a survey in there that's gigantor, right? And then
right.
Everything
when,
else.
when you look at the files, they're really small, so you gotta like zoom way in, it's hard to navigate. then, so this will just keep them as separate attachments and then
Yeah.
get rid of that piece.
Yeah. So, and as an example, because you have this one in here, the way it is now, so if you go down to one of these land use, it will show you, that there is an item, and it shows the attachments going through, and of course, this is gonna be really big. This is the whole packet, the whole section, and you can see those attachments, because this is how we're doing it currently. So when we do transfer over, it will show the first page, you'll see the next attachment will be exhibit A, the next one will be exhibit B. And of course, you will get some of these still, but you'll be able to zoom in on it that way, to be able to make it one.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Joel.
you.
Good to see you.
That's just me, sorry.
Someone asked me to come to